Thank you very much for joining us on our How to Establish a School Site Council and Develop a SPSA for Charter Schools that participate in Title I. Today is day 2, and we are excited to have each of you here. My name is Colleen Flavin, and I will be co-presenting with Lisa Winberg. The link to the slide presentation is available at this bit.ly. We've also put it in the chat several times, so feel free to access that. You'll also notice in the chat that there is a link to a digital divide survey, and on behalf of Riverside County Office of Education, we are asking that you please take a moment to complete that survey at some point soon. Last week, we focused on the establishment of a school site council. This week, we will be focusing on developing the SPSA, or School Plan for Student Achievement, to support charter schools and single school districts that participate in a Title I program. Before we get started, we'd like to review just a few norms. We are asking that when we are in the main session that you mute your mic if you are not speaking, and please keep your video on as much as possible. As always, use the chat feature to communicate. We have a great group of support staff in the Zoom that are moderating the chat, and we ask that you, when you're communicating in the chat, that you introduce yourself with your school name as a point, so that we may reference you appropriately, and always follow meeting etiquette. Make sure that we are kind and respectful toward one another as we are participating in our virtual meeting. Before we get started, we'd like to take an opportunity to see how everybody is feeling about the process. We understand last week we shared a lot of information on the development of a school site council, and now we're going to share even more information relative to the SPSA. So if you could go to the toolbar where it says you are viewing Colleen Flavin's screen, click on View Options, and you'll see the toolbar open up below. Go to Annotate, and then to Stamp, and pick a stamp of your choice and stamp on this mood meter how you are feeling about the school site council and SPSA process.
And that view options is usually at the top of your screen. So look up at the top of your screen. That's where you should find that.
Susie and Kelly are feeling optimistic. How exciting. At ease. Excellent. Lisa's focused as always. Trisha's focused. Excellent. It's great to hear everybody's focused on the work and hopeful. Lots of greens and yellows. That's exciting. Exhausted. Yes, Jill. We can imagine. There's a lot going on, lots to be done. Corey's motivated. Great. Well, thank you for sharing your feelings. We hope to make this process as supportive and helpful as possible. Oops. Sorry about that. I need to get rid of your feelings. Otherwise, we'll be very decorative in our presentation today. We wanted to take a moment and circle back to a conversation that was brought up in last week's meeting about the requirement of an English Learner Advisory Committee, and provide you the supports that you would need moving forward in ensuring that your ELAC, or English Learner Advisory Committee, is in compliance and providing two-way communication with your school site council. As we know, parents of English learners comprise at least the same percentage of the ELAC membership as English learners within your school population. And any school with 21 or more English language learners must have an ELAC. And just like our school site council, ELAC elections must be held, and parents or guardians of English learners have the opportunity to vote for parent members to serve on the ELAC. We have included some sample nomination forms, and they look very similar, almost identical to the nomination forms of school site council, in which you clarify that you're seeking nominations. People can self-nominate and tell a little bit about themselves. And we've included a sample ballot so that you can reformat this ballot should you need to in a digital way. And we have also included training for your ELAC, a training presentation that goes through the requirements of ELAC. It explains the why, what are the components of the training manual, essential legal guidance to ensure that your ELAC is operating within the parameters, FAQs that clarify the important topics of English, the ELAC Advisory Committee, the translation requirement, documentation, which is very similar to the documentation you would be keeping around your school site council, what the officers are and what their duties entail. And for many of us, this is probably looking very familiar from our school site council, meeting topics and materials. And there's a very important needs assessment here, which I'll open up in another window just in just a moment. How the ELAC and school site council collaborate on behalf of developing a school plan and ensuring input from the ELAC Advisory Committee. Responsibilities of a DLAC, essential forms and suggestions on how to keep those forms. And there are some more materials here to support you. And one of the benefits of this document is it really puts together how school site councils and ELACs work together on behalf of the school in creating a SPSA that's meaningful for all of their students. So these resources are available and they are beneficial in supporting ELAC. The ELAC is responsible for assisting in the development of a school-wide needs assessment and ways to make the parents aware of the importance of regular school attendance. Those two things go hand in hand. This ELAC needs assessment is critical in the development of the SPSA, but also equally critical in the communication between the ELAC and school site council. So once the English Learner Advisory Committee completes this needs assessment that is focused on the needs of your English language learners at the school, so parents' perceptions of what the students' needs are relative to advancing in their language development as well as in all other content areas, this document would then be shared with the school site council. And the school site council would be able to use that in the development of the SPSA. Lisa, did you have anything to add to that before I moved on?
No, I think that covers it, except to maybe just say that in the event that you are selected for a federal program monitoring review, that ELAC needs assessment that's linked there in the middle of the slide would be used for, I believe it's your evidence request for EL01, for those of you that are familiar with the process. I believe that I'm citing that correctly. Hopefully I am, but it does become an artifact during your FPM to show the involvement of your parents in the development of the SPSA. So it is a critical step in the process.
Thank you, Lisa. So again, that was going back to a conversation that we had in our first session, and we, as promised, came back with responses and materials to support you in the development of your ELAC or supporting moving forward with how your ELAC will be advising and collaborating with school site council to ensure the SPSA is developed with their input. Today, we are shifting our objectives around the SPSA. So after today's session, we expect that you'll be able to engage with the essential components of the SPSA and utilize the SPSA template to ensure that you're meeting the planning requirements. Just a quick review, the school must partner with stakeholders to develop a school level plan to improve student outcomes. The plan, otherwise known as the SPSA, has to be informed by the state indicators, so how you've done on the dashboard, as well as connect to the long-term goals associated with improving student outcomes in each of those indicators. And it must be based on a school level needs assessment. And not only the school level needs assessment that's done around your data analysis and surveys to parents, but inclusive of that ELAC needs assessment that we just shared with you. It is absolutely required for students who are eligible for CSI and ATSI to identify their resource inequities. However, it is best practice when we're evaluating our programs and practices that we're looking for those resource inequities so that we can plan to address those inequities within our school plan. It is also required that we are including evidence-based interventions, strategies, and actions and services. And we will spend some time in today's session identifying evidence-based interventions and supporting you in how to identify evidence-based interventions in your plan. The SPSA must also identify a process for evaluating and monitoring the implementation of the school plan. And if you remember last time, we went through the Title I program evaluation tool that we shared with you, and I believe one of your next steps included populating that template with your goal from your LCAP from last year and how that connected with a Title I expenditure. The goals must improve, the goals must be around improving student outcomes, including addressing the needs of specific student groups, and include how much you're going to spend on each of those actions and services. There are 7 essential steps for developing a SPSA. The first is always starting with analyzing your student achievement data. The data from the dashboard as well as internal metrics help give us an idea of how our students are progressing and making growth over the course of time. It is important that you're able to measure the effectiveness of each of your current strategies or actions that you are expending your Title I funds on. Identifying goals and areas that must be used to improve outcomes, defining timelines, personnel, and expenditures, making recommendations, recommending the SPSA to the local governing board. Then we implement, once it's approved, we implement and we monitor its implementation. I know this is a familiar improvement process, and it is also how we follow the development of the SPSA. We will be sharing with you a template that you can use in developing your SPSA. CDE had developed a SPSA template in the 1920 school year. However, it did not meet all of the federal requirements associated with Title I. And in the past, schools and LEAs had to seek approval from the state to use a template other than the state's, but that requirement has now been waived. So you can see here that we have adapted the state's template. And when you use this template that we are going to share with you, and it is accompanied by the evaluation of the Title I program, it meets all of the federal requirements for school planning. Should you be under an FPM review, you are sure to meet these requirements when you are using the evaluation template that we shared with you alongside the RCOE SPSA template we've included here. We've adapted the template to support charter schools and single school districts that are writing a SPSA for the very first time. And we wanted you to, we created the template to avoid trouble with formatting, downloading the state template, editing it Word, and using it within Google. So if you could join me in clicking on the state template, I'm sorry, the RCOE adapted state template, and taking a moment to review the template and getting a feel of how you will be completing this template and all of the components. We are going to transition to taking you through each component and each step in the template in just a second, but I did want you to preview the text. I also recommend that you open it in Word, as this will become your SPSA. And when we open it this way in a link, there's some alignment issues. So please open it by using the word open with and opening.
No. It's actually best if you download it. So on the right link here, yes.
Yeah, and download.
It's that little, the third
right here.
Yes, right there.
Yeah. And then you'll see it pop open down here, and you can open up the Word document so that you can follow along if you'd like. But we've also taken screenshots of each of the sections and can walk you through each of those sections as we go. So again, just take a moment and preview the document, and we will transition to going through each component in just a second, starting with purpose and description. But I wanted to give you a moment to preview the document. So after you complete the top part where you're filling out the name of your school and other information, the next step that you will need to complete is the purpose and description. In this template, it is important that you briefly describe the purpose of the SPSA that you'll be completing. The purpose and description includes whether you're operating, as we talked about last time, as a school-wide program. You also need to note if your school is eligible for CSI or ATSI, and you would simply jot that in the purpose section of the template. The description gives you an opportunity to briefly describe the school's plan for effectively meeting the requirements of under Every Student Succeeds Act that was in alignment with your LCAP or your learning continuity and attendance plan. It's important that you describe how you plan to put certain priorities within your plan and clarify any specific student groups in which you'll be expending your Title I dollars on. It is also important to describe how you selected your evidence-based interventions to support priority areas or student groups in need. The next section is stakeholder involvement. Your stakeholder involvement needs to clarify how and when and with whom did you consult with in developing the SPSA. This is where you're going to summarize the input you received from the school site council and how the school site council responded to any other input from other advisory committees such as ELAC. Some schools and LEAs have different parent advisory groups such as the African American Parent Advisory Group or Students with Disabilities Parent Advisory Group, and these are not limited. We understand that there may be other parent advisory groups on your campus, and it is important to summarize how the school site council sought their input and responded to the input within your stakeholder involvement section. The next part of the template is inclusive of the comprehensive needs assessment. The comprehensive needs assessment has multiple sections, as you can see. It includes a section for data analysis. It includes a section where you'll summarize responses and information you received from surveys. It can include information from classroom observations from the last school year, whether those observations were when we were on the ground, and then also when we transitioned to a distance learning session. They should also include information around professional development and the identification of resource inequities. Again, identifying your resource inequities is only required if your school has been identified for CSI and ATSI. However, it is beneficial for all schools to include any inequities that their school is facing and make their SPSA address those inequities. This is a preview of everything that we just talked about and what it looks like in your template that is probably open in another window. The needs assessment it takes the needs of the entire school into account, and it is focused on improving the academic achievement of your student population, and as they relate to the state academic standards. And it is particularly important that you are identifying students who are failing to meet those challenging academic standards and other factors as determined by Every Student Succeeds Act. I want to take a moment and review these questions. These are very powerful questions that should be considered during the needs assessment. And we included these questions on here because oftentimes as we start collecting all of the resources and artifacts and data around our school, it can be easy to get lost in all of the information. And keeping these essential guiding questions at the forefront of our needs assessment process can help keep us focused on creating a plan that is most meaningful for our students. So as you engage in the needs assessment, consider, what do you know about the needs of all the student groups on your campus? Do we have clearly established goals? Are those goals measurable, and do they align to the needs of our students? What are the school's strengths, and how can you build on your school's strength to improve outcomes for your students? What are your primary areas of concern? What can be done to improve those areas? Are the priorities in alignment with what the data is telling you? Do we need to gather more information? Sometimes when we are engaged in a needs assessment, we uncover a specific data point and recognize, oh my goodness, I need some more data around this point. So I need to go seek more information, talk to a staff member, talk to a group of students. And as always, making sure, are we using our resources to the best of our abilities? And we recognize that that's extremely important in today's time and era. As everything that we're expending our funds on, is that the best use of our funding during this time? And what are our inequities? Transitioning to the data analysis section of your needs assessment, it is essential that you are reviewing available data, not only for all students, by looking closely at each student group. An example of this would be looking at the 2019 California dashboard and looking at your achievement results. Briefly identifying and describing conclusions based on that data, and including the state indicators and making those connections to the state long-term goals. Be thinking about, how are you modifying instruction based on what those indicators are telling you? Again, this is just a good reminder, a visual reminder of what our state indicators are. We recognize we have our academic performance, which is inclusive of English language arts, math, and our English language learner performance indicator, our graduation rate, suspension rate, college and career, and chronic absenteeism. That being said, it is important to be keeping our our needs assessment and our planning around those state determined long-term goals. And as I just mentioned on the previous slide, all of those indicators, and the state long-term goal currently is by 2025 in the academic areas, all of our students are meeting those high status on those 5x5 grids. And in the area of suspension and chronic absenteeism, we want our status for our all students and each individual student group represented at our school to achieve the low status. The comprehensive needs assessment is a section that gives an opportunity for you to summarize any surveys that you have engaged in from the prior school year and the current condition, and summarize the results of those surveys. What we're trying to do is have your major findings be revealed in your needs assessment so that there is alignment between your actions and expenditures. Classroom observations are an important component of the needs assessment. This gives the school an opportunity to summarize what they have observed and experienced as related to student engagement and performance in the classroom. It also helps reveal what major trends appear as an area of focus in moving forward with your school plan. Professional development, it is important to talk and discuss how ongoing professional development is aligned to the standards, is aligned to the teacher's needs as related to providing that rigorous instruction to their students, and how your school is ensuring the ongoing instructional assistance to support teachers improve.
Yeah, that's
Teachers improving their practice around essential content areas.
Yeah, probably, because it's.
At this time, we'd like to give you an opportunity to discuss the comprehensive needs assessment. As you're thinking, as we're going to put you into breakout rooms in just a moment, and we want you to discuss what did you hear, what did you learn relative to the comprehensive needs assessment, what are your next steps in engaging in the comprehensive needs assessment, what challenges do you predict you will face, and maybe how can you overcome some of those challenges, be preventative. And because we recognize that a comprehensive needs assessment is just that, it's comprehensive, it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, we want you to be thinking, how can you make this more collaborative so it's not you doing it by yourself, that you can recruit some support for engaging in the comprehensive needs assessment. I'm going to copy these questions in the chat so that they will carry forward with you into your breakout session. And we're going to give you 10 minutes to discuss this information in a breakout room. And then we'll come back and share some general findings.
Okay, give me just 1 second. I'm getting them all set up. Okay, and how long do they have, Colleen?
We protected 10 minutes. Maybe we could wait because we started a little bit late and catch up on some time.
Okay, 8 minutes.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed your opportunity to discuss what you heard, what you learned, what challenges you predicted you might face in developing your needs assessment, and how you could recruit others to support you in the needs assessment process. Because we are such a small group, and we hope that you got the broadcast about designating a spokesperson from your room to share comments and questions from the conversation into the chat. But I'm going to ask that you actually take off your mic, and whoever your spokesperson is, if you could share some of the highlights of your conversation, and if you have any questions, now's a great time to share them with the collective.
So let's start with breakout room 1, Colleen.
Breakout room 1.
how do we know our numbers? I didn't check the numbers.
I know, we
apologize.
didn't ask you to know your numbers. Alejandro, share what you talked about.
All right. The
Put you in the
volunteers.
hot seat.
All right, that's fine. So we had a question specifically on the needs assessment portion where we would include the CASP data and LPAC data in the past.
Mhm.
This year, obviously, we're not going to have that. So the question is, what data did we include in there?
That's a great question. It is important to include the most recent dashboard information that you have. So it is perfectly okay to be inclusive of the 2019 dashboard results, as well as any other internal assessment results that you have. A lot of schools still went on assessing their students in different ways, and those metrics are just as valuable.
Thank you.
How about breakout room 3? I've got Corey, Carrie, or Trisha. Anything you guys would like to share?
I think we were really sharing how hard this is really right now on top of everything else. We brought up the classroom observation part of the needs assessment, and that's going to have to be a combination of old information from when we were seat-based, and then it's just not the same doing it through Zooms, but that's basically what we're accessing right now is Zooms and Google Classrooms. So, I mean, really it became a session of us just discussing how difficult this is right now.
And I think you bring up a really good point. Generally, this SPSA development would have happened in the spring. So if you do rely just on in-seat classroom observations, I think that would be good enough for the purposes of this plan here today. But if you're able, I know that there have been some issues with administrators gaining access to Zoom classrooms. Hopefully, that's not a challenge that you're experiencing in your school, but I think that if there is something to glean from digital observations, I would include that as well. How about our next group? I have Adrian, Brian, Kelly, Kimberly, Susie. Anything to share or questions?
Hi, Lisa. This is Kim Bagby. I'm from River Springs Charter School. I shared about how the first week of August, our leadership looked at data for reading, for math, and for writing. For writing, we looked at the rubric scores that were released from CAST for 18-19, and we saw some real distinct patterns that were easy to make plans for. For math and reading, we took our iReady scores from the end of the year and made faux dashboards out of them. It was a little tricky doing the math, and we realized that those are estimates because the 5x5s aren't written for iReady scaled scores. But we were able to look at which of our subgroups were growing, which of our subgroups were stagnant and maintaining, and which of our subgroups were going backwards, which gave us enough information to know where to change our methods and where to maintain. So
that is amazing.
That's very powerful.
That is so awesome. I just want to applaud you for going through the efforts, because it is such a challenging time to have current data. And so the fact that you dove into that level, I think is pretty great. And the fact that you said there were some very obvious patterns and that you could tell right away what types of targets you needed to write. So great job.
Very, very impressive.
And then just one more room, we have Andrea, Heather, and Jill. Anything to share from that breakout room?
Sorry, we were all finding that we were needed on our sites.
Oh, okay.
That was our needs right now, because we're either just opening or going from place to place or something like that. So
no problem.
that was kind of what we were sharing, was the oh my God, am I busy this very second? So
Yes, no problem. Hopefully you guys will still be able to gain something from the presentation today. We completely understand the many directions everybody's being pulled in right now. So thank you for being on today, despite the many places that you're needed. I appreciate it.
thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for engaging in that breakout, as well as, like Lisa said, thank you for participating today. We are going to now transition to resource inequities, which is the next section of the SPSA template that is you'll be working through. And I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to walk us through that process.
All right, let me just get it up here. Oh, goodness. 1 second here. All right, thank you for your patience while I get all situated over here. All right. So the next topic is resource inequities. And as Colleen mentioned, this section is not required for everybody. However, it is a very good idea to take your teams through this process. But if you have been identified for CSI or ATSI, absolutely this section will be required. We found a resource through an organization called ERS, and my brain is failing me on what it stands for. I could make something up. I'm really good at that, about making up what acronyms in education stand for, but I won't. But ERS is where we have really learned a lot, because when this mandate first came down from the state, nobody really knew what it meant. Like, what did it mean to define a resource inequity? We couldn't find a definition anywhere. If we reached out to the state, we wouldn't get a clear answer from anybody. They just knew that it was in ESSA, and so they knew that everybody had to do it that was eligible for CSI and ATSI. So we were, it was kind of like the blind leading the blind through the state. And so now we've had some time to really look at what was available out there and to do some research ourselves. So this is the definition that we've come up with, that a resource inequity is the disparity between how school resources, people, time, money, actions, practices, programs, etc., are allocated and implemented, and the actual student needs. So the disparity between those two things is what you're spending your money on matched to the need in your school. If those aren't congruent, we have an inequity, right? Because we have needs that aren't being met by the resources that we're providing. So that's the definition that we've come up with. They can be identified in a variety of ways. So we can identify them by a goal area, by a student group, by a state indicator. So there's not one way to go about defining the resource inequities for your context. Here's an example that Colleen and I worked on this together. We tried to imagine we were sitting in your seat and that we were looking at some data. This would be an example of identifying resource inequities by a student group. But as I just mentioned, there are other ways to do that. It doesn't have to be based on the student group. So here was an example, and I think reading through this might be helpful to help you maybe start to get your head around how you might engage in this work. So here's what we said. Through our needs assessment, the following resource inequities were revealed. Number one, African American students are not meeting standards in math as evidenced by the analysis of the iReady diagnostic, SBAC, and MAP results. However, the actions identified in the school plan, tutoring, and web-based programs are not specifically directed toward African American students. Instead, these resources are being utilized by high-performing students in need of acceleration. So see how there's not an alignment there. We have this need of a particular student group. We have resources in place, but the students who need that resource are not the ones accessing the resource. So there's one example. We also said the percent of African American students enrolled in advanced math courses is not proportional to the percent of African American students enrolled in our school. So there could be an inequity there. And lastly, the needs assessment revealed that math was a critical area of need for several student groups. However, there are very few actions in the SPSA that address math. So that was us, again, just imagining that we were sitting in the seat and getting our minds around what could this resource inequity prompt look like. So there are a couple of examples for you. And then the conversation you would engage in after those things are revealed is, how could the school adapt their current actions to address these inequities? Should current practices or strategies be abandoned? And are there any new actions the school could develop to address these resource inequities? So there's a phrase we use: adopt, adapt, abandon, and that's what that's really getting at. Anything new to adopt, anything to abandon, or is there anything that we can adapt or just change it up a little bit, tweak it a little bit in order to target it at the right students? So I just want you to think for a minute. So think about the actions that you implement with your Title I money. Are there any programs that you currently, or maybe we should say that you have implemented in the past, that could be adapted or abandoned to better address the needs of your students? So just think for a minute. And again, because we are a fairly small group today, if something comes to your mind, if you could just unmute and share that with us.
I kept thinking about Kimberly's writing example, how they dove deep into the different components of the writing assessment and looked at different student groups at the school and recognized that some methodology was going to need to be addressed in how they deliver writing experiences to different student groups. So I appreciated Kimberly sharing that when we returned from the breakout.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a great example. So adapting the writing program to better align with with the inequities that were really coming out of their data analysis. Might we get one more example? And this could be something you've already fixed. So if you feel like, my school on blast right now, there are some things we need to fix, but I don't really want to broadcast this to the world, that's okay. Maybe it's something in the past that you already had discovered wasn't fully aligned with the needs at your school, but you've already done something about it. You've already acted on it. Is there anything else somebody can think of a Title I program that needed to be adapted or just abandoned altogether to better address the needs of students? I'm pretty good with wait time in person. Virtual wait time is really hard for me. I am experiencing what all of the teachers across our state and our country are dealing with right now. Silence on the other end, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and move on. But if you have something, please add it to the chat. We would love to hear another example of this. So Colleen mentioned at the beginning that the SPSA template that we shared with you needs to be coupled with this Title I evaluation document. We introduced this to you last Monday, and as part of your homework, quote unquote homework, between last Monday and today, we had asked that you go through that Title I evaluation and write in the goal that the action supported and then what those actions were. There's 4 columns that we had suggested to be completed, and you're going to see those here in just a moment. So this is not something different than what we talked about last week. I just wanted to make that connection for you. You must have a process for evaluating and monitoring the implementation of your SPSA. So without this document and just having your SPSA without the evaluation, you are out of compliance. And we don't want this to be compliance driven, but that is just a fact. But really, how are you making decisions moving forward year after year if you are not going through an evaluation process? So we do want to see it as more than compliance, but compliance is important as well. So this evaluation allows the school site council to determine which actions were successful in meeting the goals that you had set forth in your plan. You want to identify unique data and metrics for each of these. We cannot use SBAC data to measure the impact of everything in our SPSA. We could say, oh, we did well on SBAC, so all of our Title I actions must be having the desired effect. That would be a missed step. You need to ensure that you have a unique metric for each one of those actions, because having a lofty metric such as SBAC, there are too many factors influencing your SBAC scores to be able to tell at the end of the day whether these discrete actions were the thing that impacted that score. It does provide an opportunity for discussion as to which actions need to be adapted or abandoned, and then it also does provide an opportunity to explore new evidence-based actions. So here's the template. Again, we shared this with you last week. We had suggested, if you had time between last week and this week, to at least go into that LCAP from last year. Generally, this would be pulled from a SPSA from the previous year, but the situation that most of you are in is that you haven't had a SPSA in the past. So that first column is going to be coming from your LCAP, and then you're going to write each individual action that you paid for with Title I money is going to go here. So you'll just be repeating rows for every action that you have in that LCAP that was paid for with Title I money. So now it's getting into these two columns, which are really the meat and the most important part of this template right here of what is working and why, what were those effective indicators, and then what is not working and why, and what were those ineffective indicators. This year, new to everybody, is we're probably going to see something common like this. Actions were not implemented due to school closures. You know, maybe there was a summer school that you had that didn't take place. I do know a lot of schools did carry on with some virtual summer schools, so maybe it did, but that might be, you don't want to stress about anything that wasn't implemented due to school closures. You would be able to just note that here on the document. So as you keep hearing this theme of me talking about adopt, adapt, and abandon. So again, adopt, that's your new ideas. Adapting is increasing or maybe decreasing service based on outcomes. And then abandon, that's when we are just discontinuing due to a lack of impact. And we know that we need to get that item out of our SPSA because it's not having the desired impact. So we have I don't know, I'm a little twisted, so I think this is fun, but my idea of fun might not match everybody else's. But what we did, and we really want to give you some time to think through these here. So if you come up with something pretty quickly, try to come up with something else, and even a third metric if you can. So the way this is going to work is we have assigned each breakout room a common Title I funded action. So as a group, what we want you to do is determine a specific indicator to measure the impact of the action related to the goal it supports. Then we're going to have you select a spokesperson to share your metric with the larger group. So you'll see your breakout room. I believe it's in the top left of the screen when I put you into your breakout rooms. So you'll see breakout room 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll copy these over into the chat so that just in case you don't have the presentation opened right now. But let me give you an example. So breakout room 1, here is what they're determining. They're going to determine how this would be measured. So the goal, we wrote really general goals. The goal is to improve literacy. The action is an instructional coach. So there's an instructional coach being paid for with Title I money. The question is, how are you going to measure the impact of that action as it relates to your goal of improving literacy? What are you collecting? What are you doing? What are you having your coach monitor, etc.? I don't want to give away too many answers, but how would you measure at the end of the day when it came time to complete this form right here? And right here, this was going to be a literacy goal here to improve literacy. This action was, we are hiring an instructional coach, which generally is a decent amount of money, around $130,000 to $150,000 right here. right here, how would you decide if that instructional coach was impacting the goal that they were hired under, which was to improve literacy? So what effective indicators or ineffective indicators might you be looking at? How would you make the decision as to whether or not this needed to be modified, adapted, or maybe even abandoned? Maybe this instructional coach is not having the desired impact and we need to go in a different direction. So we want you to think of what those metrics would be. So breakout room 1, again, the goal that you're thinking through is improving literacy. The action, how are you measuring the impact of an instructional coach? Breakout room 2, literacy again, improving literacy. The action is, how are you measuring the impact of Chromebook purchases? And this is very common. This one is harder, but this is something very common that we see in SPSAs, is buying technology. So how do we know if that technology is having the desired impact? Breakout room 3, improve graduation rates. So that's your goal. And the action is, we are hiring an extra counselor. So we have one counselor that we get with our general fund, but we're gonna hire an additional counselor with Title I money. How would we measure the impact of that counselor? And then lastly, breakout room 4 is improving math. That's the goal. And the action in the SPSA is a parent workshop. We're holding a parent workshop, and that is under the goal of improving math. How would we measure the impact of that parent workshop? Okay, so any questions before we go to the breakout room?
I think we could do 2 in a room, and they could come up with different metrics for each of those topics.
If it's okay, Colleen, I think I'm going to leave the rooms as they are, if that's okay.
Okay. I just don't know if there's enough for them to be, we had some people exit.
Let me see. I could, I'll put it down to 3 just in case.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll have breakout rooms 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 3. Okay, we're gonna give you 10 minutes to talk this through, and then select a spokesperson, and we'll have each room share out when you come back to the main session. We are excited to hear what you talked about. So I want to hear, was this hard? Was it easy? What did you think about it? And then what's the metric you came up with? So if we could start with breakout room 1, if you know who you are, this would have been talking about the goal of improving literacy and discussing how to measure the impact of an instructional coach. Who would that be?
That would be myself, Corey, and Alejandro.
Okay.
So we went with the assumption of ELA literacy versus like specific subject specific literacy.
Sure. Perfect.
So we came up with a few different kind of metrics that would go with it, some internal data, some statewide data. So things like the general growth of our EL students going from the different levels, including but not limited to their reclassification as RFEP, CASP data, internal benchmarks for our ELA departments. It was mentioned, I believe it's called DIBBLES. I don't know, it's an elementary one, and I'm not elementary, so I don't know.
Yep.
SRI data, interim testing assessment. So like my high school, we use the interim testing with our 9th graders and 10th graders, while the 11th graders are taking the CASP. And then we compare that with our benchmark data. So we actually are using multiple areas to kind of see where they are in their standards mastery. Lexile level testing and walkthrough data for the rigor and quality of the classwork that's being done in classes. And then also mentioned was, Alejandro mentioned, you could take the Lexile level of the kids, their grade level, but also the reading level interest that they have from their library checkouts. So that kind of thing where kids are interested in this reading, but their skill level is this level, and kind of comparing where are they interested in reading, what are they interested in reading, and what level are they interested in reading at.
Great. Those are all great ideas, great metrics. I think also it depends on how that instructional coach is being utilized in the school. If everybody has access to that coach, I think that those metrics that your team just developed are perfect. That is spot on. If you could triangulate some of that data to really show that improvement in ELA, I think you could make a pretty clear statement that your instructional coach is having an impact. There are some situations where the instructional coach doesn't impact every teacher necessarily. Maybe they only work with specific teachers. So you could take those metrics that you just proposed and compare the growth of kids in the classrooms that are being exposed to the coach versus the growth of the kids in the classrooms that aren't being exposed to the coach. That's another angle that you could look at. Sometimes I see instructional coaches listed, but they're actually maybe more serving like an intervention teacher. That's more unique, but I have seen that. So you could also look at the students that coach is working with and their growth that's being made in comparison to the students that are not being affected by that coach. So I think you gave everybody a lot to think about. Is there anybody from another breakout room that can think of another way to measure the impact of an instructional coach? Anything you'd like to add to that conversation?
I was just going to add more of the progress monitoring. And so we are already in week 3 of school. So my mind, when I'm looking at these goals, I'm thinking, how are we doing this remotely? You know, as those are some great, and those are what we would normally use to measure our EL students. We're going to have to come up with something more creative with remote instruction. So I guess I keep thinking, so I'm thinking, how am I going to have our teachers on assignment, you know, to really do progress monitoring? What's that going to look like so we can see, you know, if there is growth? Because they're asking us to write this goal, and we're going to put some money towards it. So what does that look like? What does that instruction look like in the distance learning setting that we find ourselves in right now?
Thank you so much for adding that, because that's reality. And you're right. I think many of the metrics that we just mentioned might be, we might be able to employ those in a virtual setting, such as, I'm not sure actually if, does everybody feel comfortable administering the reading inventory remotely? Can you have a student do that from home? So maybe some of those could be used. You're right. We're going to have to think outside of the box when we're spending money on an instructional coach who's working from home. What does that look like now? Are they doing professional development with teachers after hours? Are they popping into different teachers' Zoom rooms? And how is that impact going to be measured? So thank you so much for adding that layer of reality that we're all dealing with right now. And it's not enough. I think in the spring, we were in crisis mode and just responding, and we can't rely on that anymore. We can't just say, well, we're in the middle of a crisis, so we don't really know how we're measuring it. This is reality now. Like, this is kind of just how it is. This is what teaching looks like right now. So we can't really use that excuse of being in a crisis anymore. We do want to recognize there is flexibility, however, but we need to have a plan and think outside of the box. So thank you so much. That was great. Okay, how about breakout room 2? The goal was improving literacy again, and the action was buying Chromebooks. How are we measuring the impact of our technology?
That was Heather that was sharing that information.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah. So you want to keep going, Heather?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was kind of writing a few little notes here, so I don't forget. Yeah, so I think my mind, just when we started talking about the goal, I just started talking about Chromebooks. And so I started thinking about just access for students in general. That's what we should be measuring, right? The access of students. And so I was kind of just sharing our situation here at our schools and kind of where we're at. But, you know, are kids getting on synchronously, looking at the attendance? Are they doing their assignments? You know, families reaching out, our parents showing up at, you know, like our parent forums that we're having every week to kind of make sure parents are included and you can ask questions. I mean, those to me are the ways I would set the goal. Like, do students have access? You know, we can't have literacy if they don't have access, right? And so we mentioned Chromebooks. I was just kind of thinking just access in general, because we have 3 different devices going on in our schools. So I think that's how you would measure. I mean, are the students getting on and doing what they're supposed to be doing?
No, and I think that already is different and reflective of our current situation versus how we might be measuring the impact of a Chromebook a year ago, right? Because a year ago, that would have looked very different. We would have maybe been looking at if the Chromebook was to access a particular software program, let's say Imagine Learning or iReady or one of those, we might be looking at the usage of those software programs, the improvement based on those software programs. But now I think you are absolutely right. Reflective of our current condition, we're just looking at access. That's the main reason that we are spending money on these Chromebooks right now. So really monitoring the level of engagement of our students in synchronous instruction. Great. Okay, and breakout room 3, this is our last one. So the goal was improving graduation rates. The action was a counselor. So how are we measuring the impact of that counselor from breakout room 3?
Hi, Lisa. We talked about at the end of the year looking at, or, you know, along the year looking at making sure that we're tracking for our college and career indicator, ensuring that more students are A through G compliant, and if they're not, they're enrolled in the CTE courses or in the college courses that we have available, and seeing an increase in that number for that particular site. And then we talked a little bit about, but how would we really tie that to that specific counselor and having an additional person? I mean, yes, it's one thing for your numbers to go up. And we talked a little bit about looking at tracking how many touch points the students have with their counselor the year prior, and then the year that the new counselor is, showing that there's an increase of touch points. And then we talked a little bit about how much math the federal government wants to see with this. Do they want us to do a regression between those until what the R-squared factor is, or do they really not care about that deep of a statistical analysis? So as a nerdy math person, I think that would be really cool to look at.
That would be really cool.
How many is it before you get to that like 85% sweet spot?
Right.
But I'm not sure that the federal government's really interested. So those were the things that we talked about.
And this one was a little bit tricky because I didn't give you a lot of information ahead of time, but really, I think you guys started getting at this point that I'm going to make here. When you're hiring a counselor with Title I money, so that can't be your only counselor, right? Because we have to have counselors as part of our base program. So if you're hiring a counselor with Title I money, they actually should have a separate job description from your generally funded counselor. So what is it that this Title I counselor has been hired to do? What is it extra? So we can't just hire somebody extra because we have more numbers, right? Because we don't like the ratio that we use to fund our generally funded counselor. That can't be it. It has to really stem from a need that we've discovered. So it could be that maybe it's your freshmen. You've realized that freshmen, we've seen programs like BAR have been really successful. Hold on, don't tell me. Oh my gosh, me and my educational acronyms today, they're just escaping me. But it's about reducing the risk of your freshmen. That's what BAR is, BARR, and it's in place of a lot of our.
Reducing
Thank
risk.
you. Thank you, Brian. Yes, building assets, reducing risk. So something like that, the purpose of those counselors is stems from the fact of the dropout rate of freshmen, right? That they see that if freshmen don't achieve a certain level of success in that first year of high school, they end up dropping out. And so hiring that additional counselor, it's to increase those touch points, right? So they have a period where those counselors are meeting with all of the freshman teachers. They are going kid by kid by kid. They're looking at their current grades on a weekly basis. They're calling parents in, they're calling the student in, etc. So the job description of that Title I funded counselor has to be different from your generally funded counselor. So the tighter that job description is, when they really have a purpose and an objective for being there, it actually makes it a lot easier to measure the impact of that counselor because they have a really specific purpose. So in a way that was a little bit tricky, but you already started getting at it. What was the difference in the data from the year we didn't have the extra counselor compared to the data when we did have the counselor? So I don't think that the state is going to be looking for any type of a regression analysis, but that would be really cool. But they just want to see that you have found a way to measure and to validate that that money that you're spending is worth it, that it's really having an impact on your students. So that was fun. We also had parent workshop, materials and supplies, and after school tutoring. So those are some others that maybe as you're thinking through your SPSA, you could use those to maybe go through some activities later on with some of your team to think through how would we come up with metrics for these other items. So we're going to move forward. So the next part of the SPSA is your goal. This is what the section looks like. We took a snip right from the template that we shared with you earlier. So you've got your goal. Notice that you do have to say what is the need? Where did this goal come from? So it can't come out of thin air. It has to come from the results of your needs assessment. And then you're going to put in those metrics or indicators. Where is this metric right now? What is the baseline? And where do we expect it to be a year from now? So that is our goal section. We did include 3 in the template, so delete or add as needed. The normal template that you get from the state just has 1 goal with 1 action, and it's a little bit hard to understand what that is supposed to look like once you fill it in. So we've seen people just take that 1 goal in the state's template and write, 3 or 4 goals in 1 box, but really the template is designed to be duplicated over and over again, not just the goal section, but you're definitely going to have to duplicate more of the actions. We did 3 goals with 3 actions under each goal. So hopefully you see that there if you had a chance to download that. It has to be developed from a needs assessment. It could come from your LCAP because you all had goals in your LCAP that these Title I actions have been living in previously. So if you are continuing to identify similar needs, the goals could come from your LCAP. You just want it to be based on an analysis of your data. And then the annual measurable outcomes, as I just pointed out, you'll want to identify metrics, the baseline data, and what those expected outcomes are. So then we get to the fun part, the evidence-based strategies and activities. So what does this mean? So evidence-based interventions are practices or programs that have evidence to show that they are effective at producing results and improving outcomes when implemented. The kind of evidence described in ESSA has generally been produced through formal studies and research. Under ESSA, there are 4 tiers or levels of evidence. So with your Title I money, you have to be implementing evidence-based strategies. That is what the law says. So we can't just be pulling things out of thin air and seeing, oh, let's try this random new thing. Not with your Title I money. If you want to do that with your general fund money, you can experiment all you want there. But with Title I, it has to be an activity that's grounded in evidence. So these are practices, strategies, or programs that have proven to be effective. So we have this little video down here. It is extremely boring and dry, but we highly recommend it. So maybe first thing in the morning when you're nice and fresh. I would not recommend watching this at, like 6 or 7 at night, because you might have an early bedtime that day. But we do recommend you watching the video, because it really just breaks down what these tiers of evidence mean. So I'll give you a little taste of it here. You can see that there are 4 tiers of evidence. Tier 1 is the strongest. So that is your strongest level of evidence. When you find an intervention that is listed as tier 1, it has the strongest evidence. A control experiment has been conducted. Random assignment happened during the control experiment, large and multi-site samples, and it's with the setting is going to be defined in there. They're going to say that this has a high likelihood of being effective in X setting with XYZ types of students. Tier 2 has moderate evidence. So there was a control experiment, there was no random assignment throughout this, large and multi-site samples, and this one might have the setting might be effective with a particular setting or with a particular group of students, rather than tier 1, which you see that and there. Tier 3, this one is classified as promising evidence. This means that there was a correlational study, so no experiment, but there was some data collection and analysis that shows this has a pretty good likelihood of having the desired effect. And then tier 4, it demonstrates a rationale, so a strong logic model supported by research and some effort to study. So within this is complicated, and we know this is pretty scientific, but just note that if you are eligible for CSI or ATSI, the interventions that you implement with your CSI grant money have to fall into tiers 1, 2, or 3. But with Title I money, and really all of your federal money, Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4, it can be any of these 4 right here. So we want you to keep this in mind, because again, it shouldn't be random. We shouldn't just be throwing money at something like, I'm trying to think of some silly things that I've seen written into SPSAs in the past, that when you read it, you kind of go, what goal is that supposed to be achieving? And there just does not seem to be a correlation between the goal and the activity that is being paid for. I can't think of anything, and I usually have some good examples. Maybe it'll come to me. So here are some resources to start exploring to find those evidence-based interventions. Here are 4 of them: Evidence for ESSA, What Works Clearinghouse, Navigating Social and Emotional Learning from the Inside Out, and then Social and Emotional Learning in California. So I'll just click into one of these here. This is what Evidence for ESSA looks like. And they have been doing, it seems like this gets refined on pretty regularly, where they are uploading more resources that are found. And I'm gonna click into reading. And what you're going to see over here is this strong indicator over here. So while this isn't broken down exactly like what we see from CDE into tiers 1, 2, 3, or 4, if we scroll down here, this would be your tier 1, this would be tier 2 as moderate, and promising is going to be your tier 3. So when you scroll through here, what's nice is sometimes you see things you're already doing. You go, oh my gosh, reading recovery, we're already doing that at my school. I love that this is on this list. That gives you great hope, right? But you can read through, it gives you information on the cost, etc. So that's one of them. Again, Evidence for ESSA. What Works Clearinghouse is another good one. Organized by theme again. So we'll just click into literacy again here. It's just taking a minute to load. And you're going to see this one here. If you go to the key was down at the bottom. Let's see if it's still there. Oh no, maybe it's at the top. Hold on. Sorry for my rapid scrolling here. They used to be there. Let me find here. Let's click on it. So Stepping Stones to Literacy for Kindergarten. The book means that there's evidence. I was just trying to show you where to find that. But you can get into the details of whatever the intervention is. You can click into it here. Colleen, those little icons used to be defined at the bottom, but I'm not finding their correlation right now. Do you know where they put them?
Some of the interventions that they have in there, they have limited evidence, but what works best for me when I'm using What Works Clearinghouse is from my needs assessment. Oh my gosh, it's been revealed I need an early literacy intervention, and our team has been really looking into getting level literacy intervention, or LLI. So I go into the search and I search LLI up at the top, or go there, yep. Step, and I can see by looking at the LLI that there's several studies that have been done, and a lot of times I just want to know what the evidence snapshot is. So I go to the little camera up above, it says study, yep. And it gives me it's almost like an IEP at a glance. It tells me everything I need to know and substantiating, is LLI going to meet our needs at our school? And you can see from this study's been done with a large sampling of students who come from low-income households. And I can see by those little blue bars that they are meeting the requirement of evidence-based. Does that help?
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So sometimes
Okay.
I don't like to search like what's evidence-based. I like to think, what does my needs assessment say, and what am I leaning toward, and is it in alignment with what my students need?
But it may take some digging. So it's not something that at face value, if you know you're focused on reading, you could start with that literacy category. But as Colleen is saying, literacy is broad. So what is it exactly in literacy that you need to target? You may need to look through a few of these in order to find what you're looking for.
Lisa, can I just add one more thing?
Sure.
Can you go back to the slide real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes in a lot of the work that we've been doing supporting schools in developing meaningful strategies and activities to support what their needs assessment has revealed, most times we found it's not a program. It's not something we're going to purchase additionally. Oftentimes we have found, especially through the needs assessment process, and we're looking back through classroom observations or virtual classroom observations, we have found, that's this little book over here, this visible learning, we found that it's our collective capacity that needs to be addressed. So what are those effective instructional strategies that are going to benefit our students? What do our teachers need to become experts in our area of focus? So if our area of focus is literacy or early literacy, or if our area of focus is mathematics or graduation rate, what do my teachers need to have to become the most stellar exemplars in that area? And the work of John Hattie in the Visible Learning book goes over so many different highly effective instructional strategies that are evidence-based. So we've often found ourselves there rather than going, oh, I need to buy LLI, or I need to buy, and like you, Lisa, my brain is not thinking of a program, reading recovery, or I need to buy a certain, ST math, or it's not about a program, it's about our capacity.
And what that would look like in a SPSA is you would be paying for time for teacher collaboration, paying for time for substitutes for teachers to be able to collaborate. Let's just say teacher collective efficacy is what you really wanted to focus on. It wouldn't be spending money on a program, it would be spending money on time. And that is absolutely a valid use of Title I money. This one is really good. We found this last year through, it was actually a Title IV conference, but it applies to all of them. What this is, there's a list of everything here at the beginning. It is more focused on social emotional learning. So you can click on some of these here, but then there are like Second Step, that's a program that I'm really familiar with. But once you get down into the intervention, you're going to see what does this mean, what's the time, etc. You're going to get all the details. So instead of continuing to tell you and show you on my screen, we want to give you some time, one last breakout room for the day, to just go through with your breakout room and get into these resources that were linked on the previous slide, and think about that goal that you were assigned in the previous task. So were you assigned literacy, math, grad rate? What are some evidence-based interventions that may address that need? So a good way to do this is maybe you divide and conquer. Maybe somebody goes on to what works. Maybe somebody goes on to evidence for ESSA, etc. You could each take a different resource. And if you get to it, then how could you monitor the effectiveness of that evidence-based intervention, just to keep that idea of monitoring at the forefront. So I'm going to send you to your breakout rooms. It looks like we could maybe do a little bit shorter. How about we'll do 7 minutes and take some time exploring those resources, and then let us know if there's anything you find that seems really valuable. Okay, great. How about, would anybody like to share from breakout room 2 or 3?
I'm from group 2. They were just kind of helping me navigate these new websites. I'm kind of new to this process, so I really appreciate the resources that my group was able to offer to me.
Great. And then how about group 3? Kelly or Kim?
We looked at the math resources because that is one of the things that we're really trying to hone in on. And, you know, we talked about some of the teacher efficacy pieces and working on that, as well as which programs were supported, which programs we were using. And I was encouraged that our new high school math program is strong, according to
good.
SPSA. So that's very, very exciting.
That is great. Okay, great. Well, of course, today there wasn't enough time to look at those in depth, but you can bookmark those and now have them as a resource for the future. So once you figure out what it is that you're going to implement, which actions or strategies meet the need that was identified, you just want to put an accurate amount of money. So the proposed expenditure goes on that next line in the SPSA, and the source, which for all intents and purposes today would be Title I. And I have seen some crazy amounts in there. You would think that this is very straightforward. It isn't always, especially when it comes to providing time for teachers or substitutes or what have you. You really want to get an accurate amount in there. So I was looking at a SPSA recently, and it was something like all of the teachers are going to get 4 release days. You know, we have 30 teachers on our campus, and it was this whole thing. And the amount of money in there was about $3,000. And I thought, well, that's not going to meet that goal. That definitely is not enough money to meet the requirements of this action. That sounds amazing. It sounds like what they want to do is going to be impactful, but the money didn't match the action. So you want to make sure that the amount that you put in there is not just a shot in the dark, that you've actually gone through, and if it is a program you have looked at, you've gotten a proposal from them, it is inclusive of every material that you're going to need. It's inclusive of maybe the substitute days that are going to be needed for professional development. You really want to think through that before putting an amount in there. So lastly, one of the last pages of your SPSA is going to be your school site council membership form. Very straightforward here. Put the name of the member and what their role is. Easy peasy. That should just take you a moment. It'll be the first and last name, and then are they a teacher, a parent, other staff, etc. So that one is pretty basic. And then this last page is called the recommendations and assurances page. So this is where your chairperson and you maybe, or the principal, are going to sign off on this plan. In addition to obtaining signatures from the various advisory committees that you received input from. So if you have an ELAC, you would want the signature of the chairperson from your ELAC there, Special Education Advisory Committee, etc. So delete these as needed, because some of these are already auto-populated into the template. So you can delete them, or just by leaving the signature blank, in essence, you're already acknowledging that you don't have that committee there at your school. And then this here at the bottom is where you would be signing it. So that could be a little bit tricky these days in a virtual format, but we have seen some creativity with Adobe Sign. You could literally mail it to your school site council chairperson and have them mail it back to you. But digital signatures absolutely would be acceptable on this document here. I kind of stole my own thunder here, just ensure the date, the committees, etc., that everybody's on there. So with only 10 of us left, we thought maybe you guys can tell us now, how are you feeling? We hope that you're still up in that yellow or green area, but go ahead and stamp how you're feeling after learning about everything that we've shared with you today. Fulfilled, optimistic, that's great. Thoughtful. Energized, I like it. Another grateful. Good, well, we are here to support you. You have a whole entire crew of people here at the ready to jump in with whatever it is that you need. So we hope that moving forward in this process is not painful. That is not an adjective we want you to use to describe how you're feeling. You have the contact information for Colleen and I is on slide 1, and then you have the contact information for the charter team here, inclusive of